Peace and welcome to The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Folks, I got a dynamic show for you to kick it off this week. All right, first, let's talk about what's happening with President Biden calling President Putin a war criminal. Not by mistake, it is official. He is saying he is a war criminal and that he is calling for the UN to have him on trial for the atrocities that he's creating in the Ukraine. We'll talk about that with Professor Horn. Also, let's talk about making reparations real in California. I'll bring one of the scholars, researchers, and one of the top advocates of reparations, Dr. Ray Wimbush, on the conversation about how to make it real for California and the rest of the country. Later, let's talk about the great legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's been 54 years since his assassination, and we want to talk a little bit about why his philosophy, ideology is still relevant now. And we're going to check in with Coach Butch McAdams to give us the latest about sports, because Colin Kaepernick might be a little closer to being a part of the NFL once again. Stay with us. It's all happening on today's edition of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Are you ready? I'm ready. So let's go. Folks, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Happy Monday. Happy Monday, folks. We got a lot to talk about. Man, oh man, I'm really excited. We have nothing but fantastic special guests that are going to be joining us. So we're going to get into this conversation right now. Folks, if you are on Facebook, if you are on YouTube, if you are watching us from the blackstarnetwork.com, make sure that you let your friends and family know that we are on the air right now, because we want you to see and listen and hear all that we have to share with these dynamic conversations and even more dynamic guests that we got lined up for you. So let's jump right in. First, let's start with the conversation that everybody is having. Well, the folks in Washington especially having. When President Biden has officially gone on record to call President Putin, the president of Russia, a war criminal. He has said that this president has done more damage, and the war criminal title comes, and if you remember, we've had conversations about this, folks. It comes as after a number of incidents, a number of bombings that Russia has done on civilian targets in the Ukraine. But the latest one in Bucha is the one that has the president saying enough is enough. This is a war criminal. This is a person that needs to be held accountable for the pain and the damage done. And if you can see this, look, folks, he's calling for the United Nations to move forward on a war crimes trial because of the Bucha killings. And so we want to talk about what is the implication of this. Does that mean that this is setting us up again for the narrative of war? We're going to be let's bring in our very special guest. We have been talking to him about this whole scenario between Russia and Ukraine from the beginning, and we are always happy to have him on. Professor Dr. Gerald Horn out of the University of Houston, and he has been talking about this, looking at the many facets of this war as it relates to race, economics, policy. And so we want to welcome him back to the airwaves of the Black Star Network, Dr. Horn. Doc, thank you so much again, sir, for your time and being a part of the conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. President Biden said, quote, "You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter is you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal." I want to play this video, and then I want to get your take on this, Doc. Check this out, folks.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight. And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal, and what's happening in Bucha is outrageous, and everyone's seen it.
Genocide?
No, I think it is a war crime.
Are you going to do more sanctions on Russia?
I'm seeking more sanctions, yes. I'll have time to announce that to you.
Can you hold Putin accountable, though? You called him a war criminal.
He should be held accountable.
Without sanctions?
Well, no.
What else can you do?
No. Go the war crime tribunal. Yes, I'm going to continue to add sanctions. Thank you.
So as of right now, the President Biden's one of his top tools to address this issue, Dr. Horn, has been sanctions. The bodies of 410 civilians have been removed from the Calif area towns that were recently taken from Russia. There has been some removal of Russian forces in the northern area of Ukraine, but we're still seeing now there are pictures all across the internet, social media of these massive graves of bodies that are just being piled up, human beings, human flesh on the roads and on the side of the roads and ditches and everything. Very, very disturbing images. But this is taking us in what direction, as you see, Doc?
It's taken us a step closer to war, I'm afraid. Number one, with regard to Mr. Putin being accused of being a war criminal and having a trial of him in that regard, that'll have to pass muster at the United Nations Security Council, which Mr. Biden, a lawyer, must know. And Russia has a veto. If they choose not to use their veto, which of course they will, China, which is their ally, will use their veto. Secondly, we should be cautious about these pictures. I'm old enough to remember what happened a few decades ago when you had these stories before Congress that helped to generate a war against Iraq, which talked about Iraqis pulling babies out of ventilators. It turned out that those stories were not accurate. You might recall what happened in August 1965 when the United States accused North Vietnam of attacking a U.S. ship. It turned out that that was fabricated. So I would urge and encourage your audience to be very cautious with regard to accepting in whole cloth all of these allegations, at least until there's an investigation. With regard to more sanctions, the line out of Moscow is that their antagonists are sanctioning themselves. That is to say, the price of gasoline at the pump is going up in Western Europe and in the United States. You have rationing of natural gas from Russia in Germany. And interestingly enough, even though natural gas from Russia transits Ukraine, which then gets paid fees by Moscow, the Ukrainians have not canceled that deal. And so you have a bilateral economic deal between Ukraine and Russia at the same time that President Zelensky is singing the blues. Speaking of singing the blues, you might have noticed that he showed up at the Grammys last night.
Right.
It was quite extraordinary, quite unusual. I can not recall, even during the anti-apartheid days, any leader of the African National Congress given such a starring role at the Grammys. Not only that, but then after he spoke, John Legend, with his wonderful voice, then sang in accord with Mr. Zelensky's remarks. I'm afraid to say that something is fishy going on right now, and I would urge the United States to slow down, to slow their roll, because the last thing this world needs is World War III.
So to your point about what happened at the Grammys last night, and I'm glad you brought it up, I was certainly going to bring it into the conversation, but I thought it was absolutely weird, to say the least, that you have a national, a president of a foreign country being a part of an American music celebration. And then we see a black man, you know, kind of doing this song about freedom. I think the song was called Free.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wait a minute, hold up. What, you know, we always go back to that question, Dr. Horn. Okay, did we do all of this when the African students who are still over there, did that just not happen? Okay, so we're not going to go too deep into that. But I did find it to be very, very fascinating that platform was extended to President Zelensky, in that particular setting. So it's, for me, it's becoming more and more clear, Dr. Horn, that the United States is really lending all of its resources, its airtime. And we heard President Biden just say it's weaponry, it's money. All of these resources are being given to the Ukraine, to the Ukrainian government, and the talk, the rhetoric has become much more stronger. And it's just setting the table up for America to be pulled into this situation. You've been saying it since you've been on the show. I've been saying it as well. And so I'm just a little bit curious as to how this is going to play out, because it's playing out very, very fast. We already know that over just a couple of days ago, it was 30 days since bombs started dropping in Ukraine. Now we're talking about war crime. I'm expecting, Doc, and you tell me, you're the expert on this. I'm expecting that this war crime is the perfect opportunity for America to say something must be done. We need to get him out of power.
Well, you're reflecting the statement made by Mr. Biden when he was in Poland just a few days ago. Recall that he got carried away and an unscripted remark basically called for regime change in Moscow, which is more than a notion. I think what's happened is that the United States in recent years has been beating up on relatively small and weak countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Grenada in 1983, the Caribbean island, mostly populated by Black people whose entire adult population could sit comfortably in Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. But now the United States is dealing with a heavyweight that by some measures has more nuclear weapons than the United States does. And keep in mind that I just read the report to shareholders by Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, one of the stalwarts of Wall Street. He's warning his shareholders that there are stiff headwinds ahead, not least because of this conflict. We've already made reference to the rise in gasoline prices. I could have mentioned the rise in food prices, which of course is hammering Africa. Already it's being suggested that famine and starvation may erupt in the Horn of Africa, Somalia in the first instance. And a lot of this has to do with this rush towards conflict in Eastern Europe. And I don't think the United States is prepared for it. Of course, the United States has the idea that they'll fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian, and then they'll fight the Russians to the last European. But at a certain point, I'm afraid to say that these who are put in that difficult position, speaking of the Europeans in the first place, may object. We'll get an idea because in 6 days there will be an election in France. President Macron, who expected to sail comfortably to re-election, now has challengers on the right and on the left. And if he receives a result below that what pollsters have predicted, I dare say that you might begin to see a change in European policy, in which case the United States will be out on a limb by itself with the Ukrainians.
So this is becoming a real situation, right? This is becoming a very, very tangled scenario. A couple of questions, and one of my watchers, asked this question about the Ukraine being a part of the United Nations, but the country of Ukraine is not currently a part of the UN. Is that correct, Dr. Horn?
It is a member of the United Nations, but it's a member of the United Nations General Assembly, as well as the Solomon Islands, as well as Papua New Guinea. Okay. There are 193 member states of the General Assembly. There are only 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, including Britain, France, China, Russia, and the United States. All 5 have a veto. As noted, expect Russia to exercise its veto if Mr. Biden talks about trying to invoke a war crimes tribunal. Recall that when you had a war crimes tribunal directed at the leaders of the former Yugoslavia a few decades ago, Russia and China did not exercise its veto. I'm sure they're kicking themselves right now for not doing so. But in any case, that was the situation. Today, we have a different kettle of fish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Newsweek just put out a report just maybe 35, 37 minutes ago, Dr. Horn. And one of the things that they're saying about this whole scenario is that President Biden has doubled down on what well, not us. I don't think neither one of us knew that it was a gaffe, but what some had previous thought was a gaffe when he made that statement saying that that Putin doesn't need to stay in power anymore. But Newsweek has now said the president has doubled down on these accusations after these images showing massacres committed by withdrawing Russian troops in the Ukraine cities of Bucha. And even though Russia has denied committing these atrocities, the president said that, of course, that he's not changing his words. He's not changing his words at this point. And I'm wondering, so he said something. People thought the White House was scrambling, trying to change the words, but he's like, no, I'm not changing the words. Even though he initially, after he said it, the White House was scrambling. He said this was a moral outrage. Now he's like, no, I'm not. It's not no moral outrage. I'm serious about it now. So now it's not just he's a war crime. It's now the rhetoric is he needs to be removed from power. And so who does the United States have to lean on to get those objectives accomplished? Which countries do you think will step up to be a part of that effort to remove President Putin from power?
That's going to be very difficult. The best case scenario for Mr. Biden would be for China to pull the rug out from under Vladimir Putin. But that does not seem to be in the cards because China seems to believe that if Putin goes down, President Xi Jinping goes down. That is to say that they see this conflict as just a warm-up, just a bullpen exercise for going after the big enchilada, which is the People's Republic of China, which right now is in the passing lane. Within a few years, will have a larger economy than the economy of the United States of America. And their thinking is that this conflict with Moscow is a way to weaken China's major firewall and major ally, speaking of the Russian Federation. And I would also like to caution Washington about tossing around these charges concerning war crimes. Keep in mind that those same charges were leveled at Mr. George W. Bush in the wake of the non-sanctioned U.S. attack on Iraq in 2003 that killed tens of thousands of people, maimed many more. I understand that Mr. Bush consults the U.S. authorities before he goes abroad because there is precedent for trying to detain leaders charged with war crimes. For example, remember that the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet was detained for weeks, if not months, on a visit to London from his native Chile because he was being charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity in his homeland. And those charges were leveled by a Spanish magistrate. The attack on Libya in 2011 led to charges that the United States and NATO were involved in war crimes. The International Criminal Court, which, by the way, the United States is not a signatory to their charter, neither is Russia. But in any event, the International Criminal Court has opened a file looking at the U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. So Washington should realize that what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
So, and going back to that piece that you mentioned about as we talked about the photos, and I'm looking at some of these photos right now, and I mean, graphic photos, you see in human bodies just laying lifeless on the streets of Bucha in Ukraine, graphic photos, and it's so surreal that this is happening, that as much as that's happening, I mean, it just seems like everything else is just still moving along. But if these horrible photos, in fact, are real, and they speak to these ongoing atrocities, what can we do? I mean, what should we do other than engage in world war? You know, are there some very viable peace building options? Like, for example, can China jump in, and can President Biden talk to the folks, talk to China and say, hey, look, we need you to talk to Putin about stopping this? I mean, is that a viable option?
I think that that's what Mr. Biden should do. Recall that about 8 or 9 days ago, he tried that on the telephone. But
Right.
China's response, if you recall, was the person who put the bell on the tiger needs to take the bell off of the tiger, referring obliquely to the United States of America. Having said that, despite China pointing the finger at the United States, asking the United States to solve a problem that China says it helped to create by encouraging the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, dominated by the United States, to move ever closer to Russia's borders, and by the way, incorporate Ukraine as a member state, I do think that peace groups in the United States should encourage an independent investigation of these disturbing photos. The investigation should be conducted by parties who don't have skin in the game. Those parties could include China, it can include Turkey, it could include South Africa, it can include Namibia, but certainly the United States is a player, and it should not sit in judgment of its own prosecution. And so that is the role, and that is the route, it seems to me, that peace forces in this country should pursue.
And for us on this side of the water, Dr. Horn, as this narrative is playing out, what is the best way that you would recommend that people use the best of intelligence, use the best discernment in filtering what information, all of this information, to determine what is in fact true and what is in fact a part of the larger conversation or the larger attempt to create a narrative of America going to war? How do we discern? Because, people, I don't think people, and I'm not going to say everybody, but I think a lot of people, we're not thinking about Eastern Europe. We're not thinking about Ukraine. We're not thinking about Russia, And so the power of discernment, being able to make judgments, accurate judgments on our own, how do we do that?
Well, number one, I would say turn into trusted, reliable media outlets like the one you're watching right now. And I say this in part because I've received a disturbing report that Ali Velshi, who is an anchor on MSNBC, has called for NATO and the United States to intervene militarily in Ukraine. Wow. That would be the onset of World War III. So I think that listeners and viewers should be discerning in terms of the media that you consume. And in the first instance, I would say tune into The Culture with Brother Farajii, because this is an outlet where you obviously can receive objective counsel and reportage about a very dangerous conflict.
And the final part about this, Doc, is, some people are looking at it and saying, that is interesting that the president of the United States of America is calling another president a war criminal, considering. And if we look at the global hypocrisy of that call, it will put, I would say, citizen versus citizen here in the United States at odds with one another. Because now we all have to carry the burden of whether our involvement in this war is a righteous involvement or is it a self-serving involvement?
Well, it's rather striking that Mr. Biden has thrown out that allegation that Mr. Putin is a war criminal, because if this were a schoolyard, I'm sure that Mr. Putin would say it takes one to know one. Until the truce that was negotiated between Yemen and Saudi Arabia just in the last 48 hours, you had the United States supplying Saudi Arabia, which was bombing its neighbor Yemen into smithereens. In the past 7 to 8 years, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been slaughtered indiscriminately, oftentimes with U.S. weapons being at the tip of the spear. And so Mr. Biden should be very careful with regard to these explosive allegations, which not only could accidentally tip this small planet into a conflagration from which it probably would never recover, but also might open the door to him and his predecessors, such as George W. Bush, being accused similarly. What we need to do is to calm the rhetoric, take a deep breath, and once again, counsel that neutral nations like Turkey, South Africa, perhaps China, investigate these photos to make sure that this is not just another CIA dirty trick.
This puts us in a very, very, very precarious position, Dr. Horn. This puts us in a, oh my gosh. You know, the president's talk about moral outrage, but now we are going to have to, and I'm saying we as the American people, we are going to have to deal with this decision. Everything. I mean, if we haven't been dealing with a lot of this, I think this might be the tipping point that we're going to have to carry or deal with this scenario. We're really going to have very serious conversations about this, because right now, even with the president putting on these tougher and tougher sanctions, even with all of the other attempts from, NATO intervening and the UN possibly intervening, it's an America versus Russia war at this point.
And I would also encourage Mr. Biden to clean up his own backyard. You may be familiar with what you can find on the website of the Peace Corps, a U.S. government agency under the supervision of Mr. Biden. You know that the Peace Corps sends foreign aid workers abroad. On their website, they warn Black American foreign aid workers in the Peace Corps who go to Ukraine to brace themselves for perhaps being called the N-word. So it seems to me that instead of hurling these schoolyard taunts at Mr. Putin, Mr. Biden would be well advised to clean up his own kitchen. I should also say in that regard that I'm sure you're familiar with the news report that suggests that the United States is opening its doors to 100,000 migrants from Ukraine. Now, I'm not anti-immigrant. I used to defend immigrants in court, in fact. But I find it more than passing strange that you have Haitians being maltreated and mistreated amongst the Texas-Mexico border and being denied entrance to the United States of America. And all of a sudden, you see 100,000 people leapfrog the line and be welcomed into the United States. We've already heard the stories about how the U.S. ally in Britain is offering hundreds of dollars to British families who open their doors to Ukrainian migrants and refugees. We know that Airbnb is subsidizing homes for Ukrainian migrants, particularly in Europe. We wonder why Airbnb hasn't opened its doors and has not suggested subsidizing homes and residences for Haitian migrants and refugees. So there's a lot for the United States to attend to before it starts pointing the finger of accusation, because as the saying goes, when the United States points the finger of accusation at Moscow, there are at least 3 fingers pointing back at the United States of America.
There it is. Dr. Gerald Horn, professor of race and history at the University of Houston. Doc, we're going to bring you back on. So I look forward to our next conversation as these developments continue. Thank you so much for your time today, Doc.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's switch gears. Let's talk about making reparations real in California. There is an effort that Governor Gavin Newsom is trying to create a task force of who gets reparations. However, there's a little issue between Black folks about who gets reparations. We check in with scholar and reparations activist and advocate, Dr. Ray Wimbush, who serves as the author of the book, Make America Pay. We'll have that conversation. So stay with us. That discussion is up next right here on The Culture, here on the Black Star Network.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, as the conversation around reparations continue to heat up with legislation that's currently being debated and being considered in Congress in the bill of HR 40, states across the country are now being inundated with by citizens that states should move forward on some level of reparations for citizens. Now, in the state of California, Governor Gavin Newsom decided to move forward on creating a special task force back in 2020 to decide who and how reparations could be given to the residents of California. Just a couple of days ago, they had a big conversation, a big meeting about this whole issue, and it finds out that this task force was split, that there was still a big question about whether it should be descendants of Black people who were born in America, or should it be all Black people? Here to give us some insight about this conversation, as he was a part of the discussion virtually, is Dr. Ray Winbush, who is an author of the book Make America Pay, and he has been working on the reparation issue for over 30 years. My goodness. And also he serves as a research scholar at Morgan State University as well. Dr. Winbush, always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. How are you?
Good seeing you, Farajii.
Dr. Winbush, you actually were a part of this conversation in California. You actually provided some level of testimony for the California task force. The task force voted 5-4, which is a very slim margin, about how they're going to move forward on making or determining the eligibility of reparations. Give it to us. Break it down, Doc. Like, now the conversation, is it about getting reparations, or is it just about who qualifies for reparations?
Well, sometimes where there is no problem, certain groups within our community create problems. Up until about 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was clear that race first, as Marcus Garvey said and others, and that it was a Pan-African movement about reparations, that people saw skin, lineage, Pan-Africanism is foundational to the reparations struggle. The reparations struggle has always been a Pan-African project. We were excited when California appointed a statewide commission. It's the first one in the United States to deal with the issue of reparations. Unfortunately, we have these, how can I put it nicely? We have these blackface groups who are backed by white money. And I'm going to call names. I've been hesitant, but I've got to call the names. Yvette Carnell, who started this group along with Antonio Moore, called ADOS. It stood for American Descendants of Slaves. You know, the name itself is something I don't like. And about 4 or 5 years ago, they started saying that the only people that deserve reparations in the United States are those who can trace their, and the key word is lineage, to enslavement of the 19th century on back. They are an aggressive group. Members of the commission, the 9-member commission, have been harassed. I know this for a fact because I know I know 2 of the people on the commission well enough to know that their phones were inundated. When we were testifying last week, in fact, there were probably about 250 people on the call. And of those 250 people in the audience, if you please, it was virtual. At least 80%, 85% of them were members of ADOS and this other group called Foundational Black Americans. ADOS has, I tell people every time, I get students at Morgan who will say, well, I'm a member of ADOS or I'm a member of FBA, Foundational Black Americans. And I said, do you know the origins of it? And they'll say no. And I point to them an article that was in the Final Call a couple of years ago, in which the Final Call has done the best analysis of the origins of both of these groups. And they're both run by anti-immigration, pro-white supremacist money.
Wait a minute, hold on, Doc. Hold on. How do you have a group that is advocating for reparations? That group is the origins of that group being anti-immigrant and pro-white supremacists. How does that happen?
Well, I think it happens throughout. I mean, I could ask, and I'm not being rhetorical, but I could ask, how can a member of the Supreme Court who is Black be married to a white woman who is anti-Black by the name of Clarence Thomas? I think throughout our history, we find that, there are Black people who will do anything, selling out their own people for money. It's just that simple. I wish it was something deeper, but if you look at the Federation for American Immigration Reform and Progressives, this is the name of the group, Progressives for Immigration Reform, both of these groups heavily back ADOS. They are anti-immigration. They are right-wing supporters of Trump. And again, I'm not the one saying this. They say this themselves. Their symbol is the American flag. There was support for Donald Trump in the last election. And all of this comes from those who call themselves members of ADOS. Keep in mind that ADOS a couple of years ago split, and Tariq Nasheed, who authors that series, whatever it's called, about color or something, has put out several videos about history of America, that he split and said, well, if you are born, if your relative, your mother or father was born after 1970 and you have a child, then you cannot be considered a foundational Black American. So I can consider myself one, you can, but people who were born outside of the United States, who have had children in the United States since 1970, that child cannot be considered foundational Black American. It's a confusing, divisive movement, and it split the California Commission on Reparation in half. The vote, as you said earlier, was 5-4. And people are just, I would estimate of the 2 point something odd million Black folk that live in California, that we'll be lucky to get 200,000 of them reparations. It's and see, Neely Fuller says that the number one tool of white supremacy is deceit and confusion. And I agree. And a lot of people are confused about this lineage thing. For example, this past weekend, I was in a tiny little town called Rustburg, Virginia, in Rustburg, Virginia, right outside of Lynchburg. And I can trace my family tree back to 1826 by a brother named he was my great-great-grandfather, Fountain Windbush. I'm able to do that. The average brother on the street or sister on the street can't do that. And it's not that we're stupid or dumb, but we don't have access a lot of times to the files, the census, all of these things to trace the lineage back. The backers of ADOS and FBA know that. They want to limit the amount of money that goes to what they call non-American Black folk. And they've been successful in doing this with the creation of ADOS and FBA. I told someone that Farajii, this week, ADOS is very organized. And the reparations movement right now, groups like Cobra and others, are not as organized as they are. Plus, they have the backing of white racist money.
So how did it get to this place, Doc? How did it come? I mean, you've been doing reparations and you've been advocating. Matter of fact, you were one of the, for lack of a better word, you were one of the people that had talked to John Conyers, the late John Conyers, to even get HR 40 developed on the agenda. And this wasn't just like 5 or 10 years ago. This was like years ago, back in the
1989.
So you talked to Mr. Conyers. So how did it get from having a discussion about reparations, Black people having some level of there's some level of accountability coming, financial accountability coming from the United States, to now this infighting where now Black people are saying, well, if you're not of a certain lineage, if this is not, you got to meet these qualifications. I mean, how did it get to that point? What has happened over the past 30 years that has brought us to this place?
Well, I would say what's happened over the past 5 years, and that was the ascension of Donald Trump to the presidency. We saw his anti-immigration rhetoric create all the problems on the southern border. We saw children being thrown in cages. That's the only way to describe it, on the southern border. And that anti-immigrant rhetoric has spilled over into the reparations struggle. So you saw several people supporting, anti-immigration about African people, Haitian people, and so forth. We witnessed, a few months ago, Haitians being whipped while men were on a horseback, and that is spilled over into the reparations movement. It's interesting also that there's a denunciation of our, ancestors who are heroes and sheroes. There is a video on YouTube now called F. Dr. Ben. There's been condemnation of, Minister Farrakhan. There's been because all of them support reparation. There's been condemnation of Malcolm X, John Henry Clark, all of these groups. So it's not just anti-immigration rhetoric, but it's anti-Black heroes and sheroes rhetoric that for those who support reparations.
So let me ask this then, Doc. We know that there was some level of reparations given in the city of Evanston,
yes,
Illinois, right? That was
right.
And I think that came out 2020 that happened.
About in 2020.
2020,
right.
The first American city to use taxpayers' money to create a model for giving the Black residents of that city some level of reparation. What is that model, and why can't California possibly duplicate that?
Well, see, we've always said, reparations activists and scholars, we've always said that reparations are going to take a variety of forms, as they are rolled out. So in Evanston, for example, most of the reparations are, the taxes for the reparations went to those who have been discriminated in housing. In California, it's a much different, scenario. We know a few weeks ago, for example, Bruce Beach, a family called the Bruce family, received $72 million for reparations because a private beach that was reserved for Black people that had been in the family for decades was stolen during the late 40s, 1950s from the Bruce family. So Newsom, the governor, gave them $72 million. That had nothing to do with housing as much as it had to do with land. The mayor of St. Louis right now is putting an option out that you can give reparations voluntarily as part of your taxes. So reparations are going to take a variety of forms, just like we know in 1954 when Brown v. Board, by the Supreme Court was voted, that you saw open housing, affirmative action, Voting Rights Act roll out 10 years later. Reparations are going to do the same thing. The key thing to understand this is that this so-called split, which there is right now among reparations people, the split is created by white people. And they've done this. I mean, I don't know, after 500 years, we can't recognize when white people are dividing Black people. In South Africa during the apartheid movement, it was the ANC versus the Inkatha Freedom Party of Gatsa Buthelezi. And you had two different groups fighting each other. And that's what's happening right now. And, if you talk to Yvette Carnell and what's his face,
Mr. Moore.
Antonio Moore, they will deny it, but the proof is there. And again, I would, refer your listeners to look at the article in the Final Call magazine. I'm going to prepare another, it's not that it isn't up to date because it was only a couple of years ago, but I'm going to prepare another article that called them out. And I did that at the testimony last week.
So we got a few moments left, Doc, and I appreciate your time. But, now that we saw that this vote that this task force did not move forward on creating a criteria for who receives reparation, what happens next?
Well, that's a very good question, Farajii, because there are a lot of people right now. I mean, how can you say we're going to deny reparations before you even see whether or not that person or persons or group was discriminated against? And right now, the white supremacists are gleeful. I mean, they're happy because they know that they can probably exclude 70 to 80% of Black people, if not more, California residents from getting reparations. So, right now, I think, this is almost like, the play was intercepted, if you please, with the reparations, those who say it should be race-based, where I am and most of the activists are. I think we're still assessing the damage of this. Is something that I was totally opposed to, as were other people. I'm working very closely with a group in the National Reparations Institute in Atlanta, and they were opposed to it. We testified, but again, the people who are in ADOS, the people who are in foundational Black America, sometimes it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And that's what happened last week. So we're still assessing the damage from it.
So are they, and we got about 30 seconds, but are there any other states, Doc, that are moving forward on creating a task force that's similar to what we see in California?
The next state to look out for is New York, because there's a bill right now that will create a state task force. I would look at New York and I would look at Illinois, but there is one in New York, and I'm in contact with several of the people there.
Dr. Ray Winbush, who is an author, scholar, researcher in the reparation movement. He has the book Make America Pay.
Should America Pay?
Should America Pay? Excuse me. I appreciate that. Should America Pay? Talking about the issue. And Doc, you actually wrote that book how long ago?
Oh my God. I wrote it, I think it's 20 years, 19 or 20 years ago. And also I updated with Belinda's petition. And I'm not trying to push my books, but these are very important books to read.
There it is. That is Dr. Ray Winbush. I always appreciate your insight on this big conversation. Doc, we'll certainly bring you back to continue the discussion.
And keep up the work you're doing, Farajii.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the National Library. It's National Library Week. Did you know that? That your library, your local library, should be celebrated, and it will be celebrated all this week. We'll check in with the Black Caucus of libraries for America to get them insight on how we can celebrate libraries. Also in this hour, the next hour, we'll talk with sports with Coach Butch McAdams. So stay with us. A lot to get to in the next hour of The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, it is National Library Week, and we want to make sure that we do our due justice and due diligence by recognizing the power of this institution. So joining us to talk about some of the things that we need to celebrate around our local libraries is Brenda Johnson-Perkins, who serves as the Executive Secretary of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Brenda, thank you so much for joining us. Happy National Libraries Week. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Brenda, talk to us a little bit about why this is important. Why should people recognize or at least know that it is National Library Week?
Because libraries are hugely important, Farajii. We are actually the equalizers, the great equalizers of society, and that we enable people to have a level up, people who are disadvantaged, people who are suffering because of inequities in society. The library is able to provide a community space where people can come in and get the resources that they need and training that they need in order to become their best selves and to gain opportunity in society that society is not affording them.
All of that just from getting a couple of books.
Yes. However,
that's awesome.
Let me just close this door. Excuse me.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
So over the
the library it has evolved over the years, obviously, right? I make a joke, but it has evolved over the years because, you know, one of the things that you focus on, of course, is community programming and community engagement. And what does that generally look like, especially for the library system of 2022?
Well, Farajii, for a long time, it used to look like a brick and mortar building where you could come into the building and get books, right? And use advisory across the desk from a friendly librarian who would help you find books of your interest. Now we have truly evolved into a community hub where anyone can come into the library, but we're also reaching out to the community to reach and attract people who can't easily get to the library or who we have not traditionally seen in the library. For example, one of my roles as a community engagement specialist is to oversee a social worker in the library program. So that's one of the things that libraries are doing now is we're bringing in social workers because we already have people who come in to the library every day with social needs. We have people who are experiencing addiction, who are experiencing homelessness, who need to eat. And they're coming into the library and we're able to meet them where they are by placing a social worker in the library to hook them up with the agency support that they need in order to flourish. So we're much more than books now. It's become a place where the interaction, that one-to-one interaction with people, uplifting people, is just as important as loaning out a book.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, a lot of libraries, like when I was growing up, you know, especially in low income, middle income communities, you see libraries are there. But do you find that people are taking advantage of libraries, considering the great advancement of technology that people can just Google anything that they want, or they can just, you know, I'm gonna just download a book or something? Like, do these avenues by which people gain knowledge or learn about something, do they impede upon the mission of the library system?
They actually don't, Farajii. There's nothing like a librarian. It's one thing to be able to open up a book on your own or even download a resource on your own. But there's nothing like a librarian to give you emotional support, encouragement, to give you the tools that you need to surf the internet safely and appropriately, to connect you to resources in a way that you might not be aware, you know, to just open up and broaden your knowledge, not only to connect you to resources, but to sit with you, to show you how to do a resume. to help you prepare for your interview. Like we're finding that people are still coming to us because they're coming to us for more than just a resource, a pen and paper resource, but they're coming to us for connection.
Yeah.
Okay. For connection, for psychological support, and for connection to other people, to resources. We not only connect people to the paper resources, but we have programs that connect them to other people that can help them solve some social issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brenda, what's your take on the fact that right now, I mean, you work with you are the executive secretary for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association.
Yes.
And we know that there is a very concerted effort to make sure that Black history is not a part of the conversation in classrooms, that Black history is either totally erased or is greatly modified to fit some political agenda. What's your take on that whole situation?
Yeah, it's by design. I think it really is, and I think it's a tragedy that our history is denied. But when you can take away a person's history, the contributions of their forefathers, then you can make them feel powerless to change their current situation. And I think that is all a part of a process to just take away a person's self-esteem, and to eventually disempower communities. So yes, I do think that it is a travesty, and organizations such as the Black Caucus of the American Library Association are working to keep Black history, Black heritage front and center, and to empower librarian professionals to do just that by hiring more of people that look like us with our priorities, so that we can place them in libraries across the nation to uplift people of color. That is our mission, to support the professional growth of librarians, and also to support literacy efforts in Black communities. And we're doing that in multiple ways.
I think that's fantastic. Here's something that I don't know if you heard about this, Brenda, but in Copenhagen, in Denmark, they have created what is known as the Human Library. And so they have an organization where a person can serve as a human book.
Yes.
Because the Human Libraries, which originated in Denmark, according to our notes, they say to never judge a human book by its cover. Yes. And so what they are doing there is that they're talking about Texas A&M International University presented its first ever Human Library on Thursday of last week. And basically, instead of books, people can make appointments to come and to talk to people. I'm just looking at the notes here, folks. I mean, you imagine this. You come to the library, and instead of you pulling a book from a shelf, you sit down and you talk to somebody that may have such deeper understanding of that history of that particular topic.
Absolutely.
And you could talk to them. They come from all walks of life to learn more about life and situations. I mean, this is a very unique spin on what we saw as part of the traditional library system that you represent, Brenda.
Absolutely. And
but,
I mean, yeah.
But how does that play out? How does that fit? I mean, does that something that should be shunned, or is that something that says, hey, as long as people can learn, then we're all for it?
We're all for it. Actually, we've had such a program.
Okay.
That program has been multiplied across the nation. And also in Baltimore, we have had that program called Be at the Table, where we enable folks to come in and have a conversation with a person who has some expertise in an area that the customer wants to grow in. At the time, I wasn't directly involved in preparing the program, but I was able to recommend one of the human books. Her name is Betty Blaze. She is an expert in the sense that she raised a child who got caught up in the prison system and helped him to navigate through that system, come out, become a healthy, prosperous, successful male adult. And she was there for other people because we have many parents, many family members who have people who are behind bars, who want to help them, who want to know what they can do to help that person while they are behind bars, and what they should connect them to when they come out so that they don't go back.
Yeah, wow.
And that was her story to tell. And she was there and she was able to share her story one-on-one with people who needed to hear her story in a intimate setting without any stigma attached to it, where she could give her vast knowledge on the situation. And we had several different presenters talk to people from different backgrounds. It's what we need to do. That is what we mean by community engagement. That I learn to respect you and understand you based on your different experiences, and that we can learn from each other. And that's what libraries do. We're able to create those environments for people to come in and benefit. So,
that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome, right? Because you're bringing people together and you're having conversations that you probably would not normally have with any of these individuals, with any human book. And for you to sit down and to learn about people's experience and share their life, life perspective and all of those things. I mean, that sounds awesome. Let me just share with you, Brenda, what people are saying in our YouTube chat. And folks, keep your comments coming. But Taylor said, librarians are teachers too. Librarians are teachers too, with the clapping hand emojis, right? Which I think is interesting because some people may not know that to be a librarian, you should actually get some formal training. Like there is a coursework
in library science.
You got to be in library science.
Yes, it is a science.
It is a science.
Yes.
And what's behind the science? You've been doing this for some time. What would you say is the big thing behind the science? What's the big idea?
I think the big idea is to be able to have the instruments that you need, the tools you need to leverage equity. Okay, to leverage all kinds of equity, digital equity, to raise awareness around inequities. You know about this, Farajii, because Farajii is actually a great lover and supporter of libraries as well. Oh, yeah, and
absolutely.
You know about programs that we have come together and brought our minds together around, such as the dialogues on race that we've been having, where we assemble a panel of experts to talk about problems in society, but not just stop there, but to have a solution-oriented discussion and talk about resources, talk about how people can advocate, how they can be on the ground, who they can call, where they can go to get more information and support on a specific issue. So it's all about bringing in that learning. But yeah, it's teaching. So yes, in a master's of the Masters of Library and Information Science program, you're going to touch on all of those things. You know,
absolutely.
To be able to teach a class on 3D printing or Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, to help people gain the tools that they need to be professionally successful. We're able to teach that, but not just teach it, but teach it with love and compassion. That is what a library offers.
Yeah.
That's unique.
You really do have to be a lover of books and knowledge.
Yes, a lover of books and knowledge. And then you have the space of the library that's already, comfortable and welcoming. That, what better place to come in and learn and not feel stigmatized because of what you don't know, but to have a librarian start you from where you are and get you to the next level. If you're not able to use a mouse, we can teach you to use a mouse, and you don't have to be ashamed or embarrassed about any of that. If you need cash resources, or you need housing assistance, or you're food insecure, you need to know where the nearest soup kitchens are, you can come into the library, and we have social workers in place, we have librarians in place who can help you do just that. Be connected.
That sounds fantastic. Now, here's one of the other questions that we have from our watchers. Shakira mentioned one thing. She said libraries are very important. They offer a lot of services. I worked at one when I was in college, so that is really good. But one person wanted to know, Taylor, getting back to what they posted, enlarge the section with the Black authors and subject matter. Is that a priority right now for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and the American Library Association? Is that a priority? Like, hey, we need to bring more Black authors into this space, and how do we and how can we do that? What's the plan around that?
We're working really hard to do that. We have our prior president, Richard E. Ashby, is really on the ground to bring in Black independent authors in the library. You can Google his name, Richard Ashby Jr. He is connecting to self-published Black authors who write children's books, teen books, adult books. And he's at a library in Pennsylvania, and he's starting to gain a lot of traction. But he started there to actually catalog the books of Black independent authors, create a section for those authors in his library, and to get them on the shelves. So yes, it's always a priority. We need literature that is reflective of the interests, cultures, priorities of the community, and it's always been a deficit around having that literature, enough of it in the library world in America. And it's a challenge that we still are fighting every day. But yes, it is absolutely a priority to increase the collection for not only Black literature, but for all of the BIPOC communities that are increasing in population year to year. Okay? If we want to still be relevant to communities, we have to have books that reflect their interests, and we have to have staff that also look like them at the information desk and out in the community, reaching out to them. So yes, it is a huge priority, and it's one of our 21st century concerns that are right up at the top of the list.
But you said that it's a challenge. Where does the challenge come from?
I think the challenge comes in that oftentimes publishing companies do not embrace that literature the way that it should be embraced. And so it kind of starts there, but that's not an excuse because it's out there. We just have to be vigilant about bringing it in and bringing in programming that will increase the readership around books like that. For example, we have a program called Anti-Racism Storytime. I'm in a program right now. I'm in a program, hon. I'm in a program right now. Okay, I'm coming in a second. I'm in a program. Stop me. Okay, I'm in a program. Thank you. Sorry.
So no problem. It's all good.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that those challenges still exist, considering the fact that there have, like, when I go into the bookstores nowadays, Brenda, I'm seeing all types of books from Black authors, from from authors from the Latino community. I'm seeing books from authors from the LGBTQIA community. I'm seeing authors from a lot of different spaces.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the big things that I often hear from authors is like, look, no one is having the access. No one is seeing that we're out here. And I would think that the library is a perfect place to get those marginalized voices heard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a program called the Anti-Racism Book Discussion, where we specifically pinpoint BIPOC literature and showcase it and have a facilitated book discussion around it. We partner with the Maryland Lynching Society to bring that program to Baltimore County libraries. And it's an opportunity to not only read the books from past and present, but to talk about the relevancy of it and connect it to present day racism and things that are going on that people need to be aware of, and using the book as a jumping off point to be able to do that. So,
yeah, and I think people would be quite surprised to know that the library is taking more of a social justice stance. You know what I mean? Because of, there are some, when you think of certain institutions, you tend to think that should be neutral. And the library, especially some libraries, are like, no, we're not neutral. We're going to stand for justice. We're going to stand for equity. We're going to stand for making sure that people have the right to gain information and access knowledge, regardless to who or what. So I think it's interesting that the institution of the library has evolved into that space.
Yeah, it is interesting. But we have to take a stand because we are a democratic institution, and to silence is violence, right? So at some point, you have to speak out and take a stance. And the way that we do that best is to have a conversation where we invite different voices into the space, and then provide the necessary resources and information and data so that people can make up their minds about an issue. But we are providing the way to come to the truth of it.
Right.
And we've done that in our dialogues on race program, where we tackle the hard-hitting issues such as policing or health inequities, environmental justice. We're getting ready to have one coming up soon on April 26th, where we're going to talk about housing inequities.
Yep.
So that's the way that we as librarians take a stand, is we assemble a panel of experts to shine a truth on a situation so that people have the tools that they need, the data that they need to support a cause in the very best possible way.
Right. And that's awesome. Janae checked in on our YouTube page and asked, are books being banned at the library right now, Brenda?
No. Books are not being banned at the library. Even when the whole recent thing with the Dr. Seuss controversy came out.
Yeah.
We still have that book on our shelves because it's important that we keep it on the shelf for educational reasons. So what we do, if a customer comes in and they ask for the book, we give them the status of the book, that it has been banned by the publisher. This is the reason that it has been banned by the publisher, cited on these specific pages in the book. However, we still have it on our shelves because people need to be able to perhaps bring that book into their classrooms to talk about racism and discrimination and what it looks like You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
You can't take it out of the collection because then you're erasing the truth. You're doing something like what people want to do with the critical race theory thing, shut down the truth of what Black people have experienced in this country, right? So you don't want to do that because it's a record of, it's a perspective on how people have been mistreated that needs to be there and dialogued about. So we keep it in the collection, we don't ban it, but we also provide for people who want to know the context around what's going on with the book. If the publisher has banned it and why, what the problems are with it.
Brenda, let me tell you something. I absolutely love it because I'm an advocate of keeping, whether you're talking about books, whether you're talking about statues, whatever you're talking about, like, this is a part of American history. This is like just because you don't want it to be physically seen doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's just because you don't, you know, the book is no longer can be purchased. It doesn't mean it wasn't written. This is a part of the history. And I love the fact that, you know, when someone is interested in checking out, you know, a controversial book, that the librarian is saying, hey, look, this book is banned. This is why. Giving people a choice to say, okay, either I want this book or I don't want this book, right? But I don't think that the library should take such a hard stand on, oh, we're not going to carry certain books, because to speak to the neutrality and the unbiased nature of libraries, it's supposed to be a collection. Like, you may not agree with the author. You may not like their personal politics, but does that mean that their work should not be on the shelves because you personally don't agree with them? And that's silly. And I think that gets into a very slippery slope, because all of American history is told through the eyes of someone else, right? We learn about theological history through the eyes of King James. Does that mean that, oh, well, I mean, it just gets to be a very, very slippery slope conversation. And I'm glad to hear that the library system is not going to be a part of that discussion.
And we have all kinds of books in the library to appeal to a diverse population, right? So to appeal to the experiences of LGBTQ and African American and and Christian and Muslim, and people, there are going to be people who have a problem with a certain book, but that doesn't mean that we take it off the shelf.
Right.
Because what might be your trash is another person's treasure. And we have to satisfy a diverse population. So, yeah.
I love how you said that. What might be your trial is another person's treasure. Woo!
Yeah, what might be your trash is another person's treasure. Might speak directly to you.
Brenda, I'm on the website for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, bcala.org. Is that where people can get more information about all the work that you guys, the good work that you guys are doing?
Absolutely, you can. And we offer a lot at BCALA. Where we offer mentorship. We offer an opportunity for professional development, for you to come in and do programming with us. So those are some of the ways that you can celebrate National Library Week, right? Join us at BCALA, but also support your local library. Attend programs at your local library. Become a friend of your local library. Teach a class. Partner, if you're an organization, partner with your library in order to benefit a population that you have in common with the library. Call the Office for Library Advocacy and find out how you can support libraries through your testimony, through your participation, through your voting, because that's what we need. We need people to be able to testify to the impact that libraries have had on their experience, on their in order to retain our value and keep going for another 150 years. and more.
That's what I'm talking about. Brenda Johnson Perkins, Executive Secretary of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Thank you so much as we kick off National Library Week. Thank you for coming on to the show and telling us why libraries are so good for the culture. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you. Now I got to go and talk to my husband. Sorry for the interruption. Y'all know how it is. Doing stuff from home now.
Absolutely. Brenda, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Bye-bye. Folks, if you want to learn more about the great work of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, again, go to their website directly at bcala.org. All right, folks, we got to take another pause. When we come back, let's talk sports. We're going to check in with Coach Butch McAdams. Stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Holding no punches. I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all. All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, now it's time for us to check in with our favorite coach, Coach Butch McAdams, to give us an update about some of the things that have been happening in the wide world of sports. There we go. Coach, thank you so much, sir, for checking in. It's always good to talk to you, sir. How are you this afternoon?
Hey, let's hit the ground running, hitting and holding.
Let's hit the ground running. All right, Coach, first and foremost, Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick was at the University of Michigan game for I guess an exhibition of some sort.
Yeah, spring game.
Spring game. We know that Jim Harbaugh, who is the coach of Michigan, had him out there, but he was also Colin's coach when he played for the 49ers as well.
That's correct.
And that was a great year when Jim and John Harbaugh, the coach of the Ravens, played against each other for that fantastic Super Bowl. But Jim and others have been working to behind the scenes, oddly enough here, Coach, and this is what I just learned, to try to get NFL scouts to take a look at Colin Kaepernick. And according to the reports, there were some scouts that were out there from the NFL seeing if Colin still had what it takes to be a great quarterback. One of the things that Colin said is that when asked about, having scouts out there to check him out, he said, look, the big question was, is he ready to come back into the NFL? He said, quote, "It's one of the questions my agent keeps getting. So we want to make sure we can come out, show everyone I can still play, still throw it." And he said, look, I want to let folks know I can help make you a better team. I can help you win games. Now, the other part about this that I think is something that I don't think we heard from Colin before, Coach, and I think this might be a sign that Colin is trying to change his rhetoric or his messaging around him being outside of the NFL. He said, look, I will even come in as a backup. I would even kind of play to the bench. Let me come in, let's have these conversations, and then let me show you what I can do. Give me an opportunity to work out. He said he talked to Pete Carroll, the head coach for the Seattle Seahawks, one time. But what do you think of this? It seems like he's probably closer now with that workout than probably he's been over the past 6 years. Am I right or wrong on that?
No, you're absolutely right, because of timing. Timing is everything. And with the NFL going through the suit in terms of racial disparity, what better way to make at least some type of amends would be to give him a workout. Also, I think on Kaepernick's behalf, I think he is certainly more sincere and serious about coming back and playing this time than previous occasions.
Wow. So when you say that, that's interesting. You're saying he's more sincere. What do you mean by that, Coach?
I mean that in the past, I think it was lip service, okay? And I think he was more involved in his activism. I think back then, and again, I'm just guessing, I don't know him, I've not had a conversation with him, but just my assumption and what I've gathered, that back then, it was more lip service where, hey, give me a chance because I can play. But now, it's like, hey, you know what? He's focused 100% on returning to the NFL as a football player. And I don't have anything or any problem with that.
Oh, I know you don't have a problem with that. All right, let's talk about the athleticism of Colin. Based on the footage that you've seen, we're showing footage of him doing his workout also at UCLA, because he did that a few days ago. I mean, he's throwing them bullets, Coach. I'm not going to front. He's throwing them bullets, and he's throwing them long and deep. So what, when you see his athleticism at this point, do you say, okay, here is an NFL caliber quarterback? Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, no question about it, because that, as we've discussed previously, in my opinion, the most difficult task in all the professional sports is to play the position of quarterback at the NFL level and be successful. And that's why they're paid so handsomely, and that's why they're few and far between. Now, can Kaepernick come back and lead a team to a playoff or Super Bowl? I don't know. But is he good enough to make a roster, and certainly better than most, if not the majority of the backups, I say yes.
Janae checked in on our Facebook, on our YouTube channel, and said, please give Colin a chance. He's not going to give up. The Commanders can use him. That's right there. That's your home team of Washington, D.C. The Commanders can use him.
Absolutely. No question about it that the Commanders could use him. No question. Look, the guy obviously is good enough to make a roster. Now, again, it remains to be seen, how good he could be consistently as a starter. But there's no doubt in my mind he's good enough to make a roster.
And which teams do you think that really are going to take a serious look at him? Because in the reports, they did not say where those NFL scouts came from.
Pittsburgh could probably look at him, and I'm guessing. Pittsburgh, Seattle.
Yeah.
Maybe even the Ravens. Maybe even the Ravens.
And you hitting a nerve right now, Coach. You talking about my Ravens. I hear you. I would say Seattle. I can see Pittsburgh. I can see Washington, D.C. I don't know if I see the Ravens, but I can definitely see
back up. As a backup.
Yeah. Like you said, Colin is kind of redefining his tone at this point. He's willing to play team ball and not me ball at this point, right? He said, look, I'm willing to come in, be a part of the team, and be a part of making sure that the locker room is in a positive space. So he's willing to play team ball. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we can see in him. It's not about his athleticism; it's about his intention and where his mind is. And I think that was a big question mark for a lot of coaches and a lot of owners of whether he's going to come into the situation trying to convert people to a level of social justice. Even though I never saw him doing that, but if he would disrupt any type of team chemistry that's been established. So I think this might be the closest that we've seen Colin possibly, and I would not be surprised if he gets chosen by the NFL team anytime soon. I would not be surprised, Coach.
No, I wouldn't be surprised either. And he should have an opportunity. Bring him to camp. Let him compete in camp. Maybe even let him play a preseason game or two, and then you go from there.
And let's not talk about the money that he could possibly bring to a team with his jersey. If he goes to Seattle.
Oh my God! Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's the money. Like, can you imagine? I mean, you understand the dynamics of business and money, Coach, but in sports. So the amount of money that a team can get if he just played a preseason game, I mean, it would be incredible. It would be just crazy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods arrived at Augusta's National Golf Club on Sunday and made his way to the practice ground. He's not given any sign of whether he will compete in the Masters this Thursday. Of course, he's a 5-time winner of the Masters. And he wrote on Twitter that he said, quote, I will be heading up to Augusta to continue my preparation and practice. It will be a game time decision on whether I compete. He hit balls for about 20 minutes, and then he got into a cart and hit it to the course, which is closed on Sundays to everyone except players and caddies. And, he hasn't made up his mind just yet, but we also know that he suffered some major injuries from that car crash that almost took his life. He said he spent 3 months immobilized in a makeshift hospital bed in his home, and he really had to his body had to start all over in terms of walking and functioning. What are your thoughts about Tiger coming back to the Masters?
Well, yeah, as you said, it's just a blessing to just feel to have him with us. Tiger loves the game. I can't say whether or not he will come back, but I'll say because of a lot of factors that his days of winning a major tournament is done.
So you're saying that even if he comes back, he's not gonna capture.
No, absolutely not. No. No, and even before the accident, the chances of him winning another major to me was very slim, very, very slim. And you know, because of the number of surgeries he's had and the issues that he's had with his back.
Yeah.
But you know, hey, Tiger, if he never competes again, he goes down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, but he certainly goes down as someone who has revolutionized and changed the game of golf.
Oh, no doubt, Coach, no doubt. I think, and I think some time ago I've heard that he got more black boys and black girls involved in golfing than any other player in history. So, I think that he has certainly revolutionized it. There was a point, though, Coach, where back in, I think it was 2019, he had another situation, and then he came back to golf. He was 43 years old. He played in the Masters and ended up winning that situation, winning that tournament in 2019. So it's interesting that you say, hey, he doesn't have, you don't think he's going to be able to go all the way. When do you think he should retire, Coach?
That's up to him.
Yeah.
I can't say when someone should retire, especially in an individual sport. That's up to him.
Yeah. Do you when you are coaching teams and your players, right? I always wondered this, Coach, like, do coaches have those conversations with players that they say, hey, I think it's your last dance, man? Do y'all, or is that a line that y'all just don't cross?
That's a line you don't cross. What you would do is talk about when you no longer can play, then what are you going to do?
Right.
Because it's hard to tell someone that you shouldn't do something that you have passion and desire and love for. Okay, but in John Thompson, you'd go in Coach Thompson's office, and the first thing you would see would be that deflated basketball. And that was symbolic of when the ball no longer can bounce, then what are you going to do?
What do you do after this when the ball can no longer bounce? I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So that's the, and I never coached anything higher than the high school level, which that was my choice. But I would always talk about with young people, what are your future goals? And if they say, well, I want to go to college and then I want to go to the NBA. And I would never discourage them and say, no, you can't do that. But then I would say, okay, that's option one. Now what's option two?
Yeah. That's a big conversation. And I think coaches can serve as a huge part of that discussion. I think they can play a huge role in making that decision. All right. Speaking of ending it, Coach K, Mike Krasinski, he coached his final game, beaten by his arch rival, Coach. He was beaten by his arch rival. And it was that 3-pointer in the final minute that just did it. It was a very close game throughout, but Duke couldn't take it over. And then he walked over to his wife and said it's okay because folks were expecting this huge celebration to kind of like this big bow on top of his career. But I remember you saying, Coach, you didn't think Duke was going to win. Say it again, Coach.
Excuse me. I said I didn't think they were going to go all the way. No. Okay. But looking at it from a coach's perspective, the issue was free throws. Every close win or every close loss, or I should say 95%, will come down to who hit their free throws and who did not.
Right.
And Duke missed their free throws. As I said, I was rooting for North Carolina for a whole bunch of reasons. Number one, African-American coach. Number two, from the DC area. And the third thing, I was really upset with Coach K. And I don't know whether we discussed this or not, but it needs to be brought to light that the administration and the athletic department wanted Tommy Amaker to replace Coach K. Coach K opted for an assistant coach who was not African-American, who had no head coaching experience, and selected him as his successor.
And what does that say to you about Coach K?
I don't know. I think it would be unfair to say it's a racial situation without knowing, but I don't think it's unfair to say it is a bad look.
So it's sort of like poetic justice.
Right. And Carolina, on the other hand, I mean, Davis was their first African-American coach, but Dean Smith was one of the greatest men you could ever encounter. And notice I didn't say basketball coach, man. Dean Smith did so much for integration in North Carolina as Martin Luther King. And there's no disrespect to Martin Luther King, but I just use that example that if you look at Coach Smith's resume and his story, this guy was phenomenal.
Right.
And I remember one time, who was the guy in North Carolina? Was it Jesse Helms, I believe, where he threatened, he said, you know what? If we can't get a good candidate, I'm going to run against Jesse Helms. And there were so many stories about Coach Smith. And, you know, first he brought Charlie Scott to North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He was the first black to play in the ACC. And then there were stories about how the black students out in Chapel Hill had a protest to support the cafeteria workers who were black and who didn't have benefits. And Coach Smith backed them on that. So, and look, I had the opportunity for 2 summers to work as a basketball instructor at Dean Smith's basketball camp down in Carolina. So I got a chance to meet Dean Smith personally. And he was a special guy. My Dean Smith story was this was the summers of 74 and 75. You fast forward, I'm a varsity head coach, 1984. I got my first All-American, and he's playing in the Capital Classic. And I'm walking, around the perimeter of the Capital Classic, and I run into Coach Smith. And now this is 10 years later. And I go up to him and I say, Coach Smith, how you doing? You probably don't remember me, and before I could say Butch McAdams, he looked me in the face. You're Coach McAdams. How you doing?
Wow.
Great man. So, but tonight's game is the 5, I would pick Kansas.
It is.
But one thing that the NCAA tournament has taught us, the best team doesn't always win. It's the team that's playing the best on that night.
There it is. Coach Butch McAdams, host of In and Out of Sports. Coach, it's always a pleasure. I'm so happy that you are, share your time and your thoughts with us, especially giving us some history, some Black history that some of us may not have known about, especially me. So I'm always grateful for your time, dear brother. Thank you so much, Coach, for being with us
My
here
pleasure.
tonight.
Thank you. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Farajii.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, sir. Folks, look, let me just tell you, before we close out tonight's show, dynamic show, fantastic guest. I cannot close out tonight's show by it being April the 4th, 2022, 54 years ago. The great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on that balcony, right? 54 years ago. Now, I know when 55 years come, God willing, next year, there's going to be a lot more celebration. So you may or may not have had this on your mind, but I always associate April the 4th, 1968. That always sticks to my mind just simply because I am a student of the great philosophy of Dr. King. You said, what? Farajii Muhammad? Yes, I am a student of the great philosophy of Dr. King. He was a brilliant thinker. Brilliant thinking. I mean, far ahead of his time, folks. And there have been a number of excellent books that really give us a better view and context of who Dr. Martin Luther King was. I can think of a book that I have right here in my hands called A Testament of Hope, The Essential Writings and Speeches of Martin Luther King Jr. This was edited by Mr. James M. Washington. I mean, the number of speeches that this book has, and this is like a reference book, but the number of speeches, interviews, sermons, essays, it is incredible. And they cover everything as early as 1957, all the way up until his final sermon of 1968. There's another book, The Death of a King, by Brother Tavis Smiley, which talks about the final year of the life of Dr. King, where in his final year, Black America was starting to move in a different direction, and they started to shun Dr. King from the conversation about everything from liberation, politics, social issues, education, economics, all of those things. Fantastic book as well. But when we think about Dr. King, I want us, and I hope and pray that many of us take the time and take the day to just reflect on what Dr. King brought to the conversation, what his life did to change the course of history and to give us not just a dream, but it gave us critical thinking about the human condition. As a student of Dr. King, I realized that he is more than just a dreamer. This man had a vision for a whole new world rooted in freedom, justice, and equality, rooted in the idea of faith. He was a philosophical theologian. And so his words were poetic. His vision was broad. It was all encompassing, but he never strayed from the idea of getting justice for Black people. Now, we can criticize Dr. King and from his early years, but one of the great things, and you got to remember, he was only in his 30s when he was killed. But one of the great things that I loved about him was that this is a man that evolved. He evolved over time. By the time he got to 1968, he wasn't seeing Black people as Negroes. He was calling us Black people. He didn't just think about integration was one of the things that he talked about, but then he started to say, well, maybe there is another way to get justice. So we may not have to integrate. We may need to separate. And so there were a lot of things in his philosophy, but he was a man that understood the human condition like no other. And there are a number of heroes and sheroes that have understood the human condition. But I love the way Dr. King thought. So I just wanted to put that out there for everyone, that today, 54 years later, we didn't lose Dr. King because we're still talking about him 54 years later. So when you look into the writings, the works, the speeches, and all of the things that Dr. King brought to the conversation about Black people and about humanity, don't think of it as being a loss. Think of it as being a continuation that really continues with you and me, that we can take the torch that Dr. King had and that he passed on to us. He passed on so many great things for us to consider that, you know, when we look at Reverend William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign that the great Reverend is doing right now in this country, there are a number of people that have taken the mantle of of the Dr. King's mission and calling and continue that same mantle. And so I just wanted to show my great appreciation for this man that is often misunderstood. Some see him as controversial, and some even call him weak. He is far from that. He is far from that. Read his writings, and you will see a man that is not weak, but certainly a man that was ahead of his time. And he wasn't just a dreamer. He was a thinker, and he understood the reality of the great things, the great challenges facing Black people and people across this country and around the world. He was a revolutionary, and that's why they killed him. It wasn't because of his dream. It was because of, in 1968, folks, he knew that war was not the answer. And as a result of that, when he spoke out against the Vietnam War, that was the end of his days. And do you know, when he gave a speech in Riverside in Manhattan on April the 4th, 1967, he was killed 1 year to the day in 1968. But he knew that there was a moral consciousness that was missing in this country. And that's one of the great things that I love about him, is because even though he was talked about, he was maligned, he was hated on, and all of those things, he stood his ground. His morality carried him through. And I think God had blessed him to be talked about for generations because of just that issue. So rest in power, Dr. King. You will never be forgotten here on The Culture and on the Black Star Network. And folks, do your research, and let's continue to hold the light of Dr. King's life and legacy up, and let's continue to take his mission to the next level. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me. I thank each and every one of you for being a part of the conversation. Make sure y'all check us out at blackstarnetwork.com. We need your support. We're always asking for your support. Our numbers are increasing daily, and so we thank you for taking in and sharing with your friends and letting so many more people know about it, from Roland Martin Unfiltered to all of the great programming we have on Black Star. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for your continued support of the culture here on Black Star. So we want to continue to blow this network up and let people know that Black-owned media is here. We're here to stay. We're here to empower and inform. But most importantly, we're here to be unapologetically Black about every conversation that we have on this great network. God willing, we'll talk tomorrow. As always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong, stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. Stay tuned at the 6 o'clock hour. My big brother, Roland Martin Unfiltered, is coming right at you with a whole lot of news about the latest around Judge Jackson and so much more. So make sure y'all tune in. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight to The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Peace.